Today I'm going to cover some of the questions I had from last week's giveaway build of the EDC Skinner. Before I get into answering the questions, I just want to remind everyone that I'm going to do the drawing for that knife 1 week from today. In order to be eligible for the drawing, you must be a subscriber to my channel and you must comment in over on that video's comment section. Now there's a link to that video in the description below. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about, had several questions about my disc grinder setup. Alright, so let's talk real quick about what I've got here. So I have what I would call a vertical disc and a horizontal disc. Now the horizontal disc I use mostly for flattening and taking down the back sides of materials that you don't want to grind the fronts. For example, mammoth ivory. When you thickness mammoth ivory, you have to thickness it down from the back side because you don't want to lose that pretty bark on the front. And so that's what I use this horizontal disc for mostly. It's just got a flat aluminum hub on it. The motor is a 3/4 horsepower 54C frame motor, 3-phase. And it's bolted to an aluminum bracket. Now both this disc, this hub, and this aluminum bracket came from Midwest Knife Maker Supply, otherwise known as USA Knife Maker. And the motor itself is just bolted to the bracket, and the bracket is bolted to my bench with some lag screws. Generally, I only keep some coarse paper on this because the thicknessing is usually done at a I'm looking for speed more than I'm looking for a fine finish. So this has usually got like some 60 or 80 grit paper on it. This grinder, same motor that's on the horizontal disc, so it's a 3/4 horsepower 56C frame 3-phase motor. And this motor has a work rest system that's made by Beaumont Metalworks. Okay, the people who make the KMG grinders. You can buy this work rest as a separate assembly without the rest of the grinder, and it is made to bolt to the face of a 56C motor. Then on this one, so let me show you one of the nice things about this. It's very adjustable. You can slide the work rest off like that so that you have free access to the entire face. Another thing you can do is you can tilt the work rest to whatever angle you need and get it off out of the way if you need to. Now another feature of this grinder is the hub. Now this grinder is set up with a Nielsen magnetic hub system. And what that allows me to do is use multiple steel plates on the face of it with paper, and I can go through grits quickly. If I'm working with a coarse grit, say a 80 grit paper, and I need to go to a 180 grit, then I can just pull the hub or pull the face off the magnetic hub. And let's see if I can do it without embarrassing myself here. The magnets are pretty strong, so you got to put a little emphasis, a little oomph into it. But basically it's a steel plate that has been machined flat, and this is an aluminum hub with rare earth magnets on the back of it, and they're very powerful, and they hold this thing on really well. This disc is what they call a modified flat disc. Basically it's a knife edge, so you can get into really small tight corners. I have other discs, so I'm going to set this one here. This is another disc that goes on here, and all of these register. This hole registers on a spud right here on the center of that. So this disc is actually a beveled disc. So this has a 1 degree bevel from the center to the outside. And what that allows you to do is when you're grinding, like if you're going to flat grind a blade on this, it allows the blade to go past the side that's spinning in the opposite direction. So you can just work on one side and not worry about hitting the blade on the side that's going to twist your blade in the opposite direction. And I have, it may be difficult to see on the cross section here, but I actually have a piece of 3/32 hard rubber in between the steel plate and the paper. And that allows a little bit of give to just give you a cleaner, easier finish when you're working with this on blades. And that's what I use this for. I use it for grinding blades. In my giveaway video last week, some of you saw that I actually came to the disc grinder and finished out that blade on the disc grinder with a file guide on it. And you can put that file guide right up against, so let me stick this on here. And you don't want to get your fingers behind here. You want to make sure you're holding this by the edge when you slap it on there. But you can get that file guide right up against the edge and let the edge of this rub against the file guide. And because it has carbide faces on the file guide, you're not going to worry about rubbing or eating into the file guide. All right, so the next thing is the controller. Now the way I have this set up is I have one controller that controls both discs, but only one runs at a time. And the way I did that is I ran a 3-position switch. Now this switch has a position 1, a neutral or a negative or a off, and then a position 2. And if I have it one direction, it controls one disc, and if I have it the other direction, it controls the other disc. So basically they're both wired in, and then the power supply comes from the controller. Now this is a KBAC 24D. It's a hybrid VFD, variable frequency drive, and it'll run these discs. It's got an on switch, so we got the horizontal disc on, and I can run the speed down to almost nothing and all the way up to the full speed of the disc, which these are 1750 RPM motors, I believe. So then if I switch this over, now when I turn it on, I turn on the vertical disc. All right. And this controller, it does have a reverse, so I can change the direction. And every grinder in my shop is on one of these drives, either the 24 or the 27D. It's just, in knife making, you want as much control as you can possibly get, and speed control is one of those things that is invaluable when you're making fine knives. So next thing I want to show real quick, I'm going to change back to the other disc. And just wipe it clean. Wipe this off. Make sure there's nothing going to get caught behind there. Again, hold it just by the edges so you don't get your fingers stuck. And then drop it down on the hub. So what I'm going to show is how I square everything up. So I push this, when I put it on, I put it all the way up against the disc, and then I just back it off enough to have a little bit of space. But I don't want anything to get caught in there, so it's up pretty close. All right. So the next thing I do is this is a machinist 90-degree angle. Actually came in a set. I think it was a 90 and a 45 and a 60. And this is how I make sure that I have my table square. So I'll loosen this up. These are tight. And basically I push at the top and I push at the bottom and I see if there's any rock. And I have a little bit of rock right now. So I just adjust my table until there is no rock between that. Right there, it's good and tight. I like to tighten up one side a little bit, tighten up the other, and then go for final tightness. I've found if I just swing them both, it tends to pull just enough to take it back off square. So that's nice and square, it's ready to go. It's clear of the disc, but I couldn't get a fingernail in there. Other tools that I use on the disc, I use one of these protractors. Sometimes you need an angle, whether you're doing dovetailed bolsters or you're doing the face of your lock on your folders. This is set to 7.5 degrees, which is what I do my locks at. And I do it the same way. I just loosen the bottom up and I put this in here, and when it doesn't rock between the two, then I know I'm at my angle. If you got any more questions on my disc setup, feel free to ask in the comments section. Let's move on to the next subject. All right, so here's the next thing people were asking about. I had some questions about my Scribe, and what this is really, it's a pin vise with an old broken 1/16 inch carbide drill in it. Now, grinding carbide can be difficult. I do this on my diamond lap that I use for honing my engraving tools. But before I had that, I did it on these little diamond files. Okay, so I got it as close as I could. I used a ceramic belt and got it as close to sharp as I could, and then I just worked it on this diamond file until I got it sharp. Because it's carbide, it holds an edge really well when you're scribing on metal. So that's all that is. All right, so another question I had was about one of the tools I was using over the drill press after I drilled the large holes on that giveaway knife. These are just deburring tools. This one's made by General Tool. This one's made by a company called Empire. I'm pretty sure that this came from like Lowe's or Home Depot. They have a little General Tool section, usually on one of the end caps. And basically it's just this is a carbide cutter that fits, so I pull back on this and I can pull it out. And there's really not much to it. It just goes in, it's held in place, and it spins. So you can follow circles around and it'll spin as you're cutting the circle. You can also deburr down a straight edge. For example, if I was going to deburr this, I can just pull it straight down the edge, and because of the way that it's shaped, it'll just follow that. That's all those are. All right, so now let's talk real quick. I had several questions about tinting my epoxy. So first of all, I use G-Flex. I've had really good luck with it. I've never had a failure with it. One of the nice things about it is that West Systems has done a lot of research on what the capabilities of their epoxy are. And they have a paper published, it's available on their website, that shows the strength of the epoxy when it's mixed with other things to tint it. And basically what the research showed is that you can combine it with just about anything to tint the epoxy, as long as what you are adding is less than 5% of the total volume of the epoxy. So for me, you know, I try to employ just a little bit of color theory and mix my epoxy to a color that's very, very close to whatever I'm trying to match. So usually it's when I'm using liners. For example, if I'm going to put a burl right next to a tang, I don't tint because that burl has different colors in it, and my epoxy, if I tint it, is not going to match very well to the burl. It's going to be one solid color if I tint it. But if I'm using a liner, for example, let's say like last week I used an OD green liner, I can tint my epoxy to get an OD green. And I use these artist oils. I've been using this set to tint my epoxy for about 5 years now, and you can see they all look like they're still full. And the reason for that is because I use such a small amount. A very, very tiny amount goes a long ways. And I'll show you how much I use. So for example, last week when I did the OD green, I used a little yellow ochre and a little bit of this sap green. Now, this is how much it takes. And this is usually how I do it. I'll either put it on my stir stick or I'll put it in my cup. And it takes just the tiniest smear of paint. That is more than enough green to do a whole batch for putting liners on a knife or putting a knife onto it, or putting scales onto a tang. And then even less of the yellow, because I'm just trying to get something close. That's even too much right there. I'm just trying to get something close to that OD green, and that's all I need. Okay, and the way I do it, usually instead of putting it on the stick, I'll put it on the bottom of my mix cup. Now these are little medicine cups. They have, I don't know if it's going to pick this up on the video or not, but they actually have markings on them for volume. This is in cc's, but what I do is usually I'll put epoxy in. Now West Systems, this G-Flex mixes 1:1, so I'll go to like the 2.5 cc line with part 1, and then I'll go to the 5 line with part 2. So now I know I've mixed 1:1. I'll have 2.5 cc's of part 1 and 2.5 cc's of part 2, and then I just mix the color in with it. Don't forget to subscribe and go enter the drawing for that little EDC skinner I built last week. I'm going to give it away to somebody next week. Make sure you're in on that drawing. Until next time, be safe out there. I'm Bob, and this is Ranger Made Knives. Out.